This is Where the Wind Waits, written by Beryl Coops.
Beautifully haunting and emotionally resonant, Where the Wind Waits is a lyrical tale of longing, memory, and the spaces grief refuses to leave. The wind had always been there, not a roar or a storm, just a presence. A constant thread through the days and nights at Merrow's Point, rustling the hedgerows, whistling through keyholes, turning the tall grasses along the cliff edges into waves of green. And then, one day, it stopped. 6 months on, Lena Caulfield still woke expecting to hear it. It was the same each morning. She would lie in bed, staring up at the cracked plaster ceiling, listening, waiting for the creak of the old sash windows or the familiar sigh that moved through the chimneys. But all she ever heard now was the sound of her own breathing and the occasional pop of the radiators cooling. She used to love the quiet. Before. When Daniel was here, the quiet meant he was safe, somewhere in the house, probably asleep or hunched over his sketchpad. Now it was unbearable, the kind of silence that pressed against your skin and left fingerprints. The villagers had stopped talking about the storm after the first month. It had rolled in without warning, a freak thing, they'd said, waves climbing the sea wall, whole trees bending like reeds, and the sky turning the colour of bruises. And Daniel, who had gone down to the cove to take photographs, hadn't come back. They said it was the sea that took him, that even strong swimmers didn't stand a chance in water like that. But Lena hadn't seen the sea take him. No one had, just a scream or a sound like one. And then the wind had died. Now the windless days passed like mist, soft, clinging, weightless. That morning she stood in the back garden with her tea cooling in her hands, staring across the gorse-covered field behind the house. The sea lay just beyond the ridge, a grey, unmoving line. She hadn't gone down to the cliffs in weeks, not since the footprints. She'd told herself she imagined them at first, small, barefoot, set into the damp earth just outside the back door. Too small for an adult, too fresh to be her own. They had started nowhere and ended at the threshold, and then vanished. No smudge, no trail. Just 5 prints in a soft arc, facing the door as though someone had come to visit, then changed their mind. She never mentioned them to anyone. People had already begun to look at her differently in the village, kindly but cautious, as if grief were something that might rub off on their coats. She could see it in the way they smiled, too tightly, too briefly, in the way they changed the subject when Daniel's name surfaced. Even her sister, Ruth, had started using phrases like closure and grieving process, like she'd printed them off WebMD and brought them wrapped in foil. But Lena didn't want closure. She wanted her boy back. She turned back into the house, setting the untouched tea on the kitchen table, and glanced at the calendar pinned to the fridge. Another X. 6 months and 5 days. The kitchen was the only room she hadn't changed since Daniel died. It still had the messy warmth of their old life. Tea towels slung over cupboard doors, 2 mismatched mugs in the sink, the corner where Daniel used to leave his bag and kick off one shoe, never both. She kept meaning to move them, his trainers. But whenever she tried, her hands would hesitate, fingers curling just above the worn canvas, as though touching them might change something she wasn't ready to lose. She sat at the table and opened her notebook. The grief counsellor, before Lena had stopped going, had suggested journaling. Just write anything, she'd said. A thought, a memory, a word. It helps loosen things. So far, all Lena had written was Daniel's name, over and over, in different pens, different sizes, as if by writing it enough times she could bring it back into the room. She was halfway through another when something flickered at the edge of her vision. A shadow moved past the window. She froze. The garden was empty. She stood slowly, pulse drumming in her throat, and stepped toward the back door. Her fingers hovered above the latch. She didn't open it. She couldn't. Instead, she leaned closer to the glass, pressing her forehead gently against it. The stillness outside was absolute. The trees stood like statues. Even the tall grass hadn't moved. And yet, there it was again. A flicker, a shape at the edge of the field, just beyond the garden fence. A boy. He was turned away from her, his hoodie pulled up over his head, sleeves too long, hands stuffed deep in the pockets. Barefoot. She was sure of it. Her breath fogged the glass. Daniel. The word left her lips before she could stop it. Half breath, half prayer. The boy didn't turn. He just stood there a moment longer and then, without a sound, walked into the field, disappearing behind the rise. Lena threw the door open. Daniel! The name cracked in the air like a whip. She ran barefoot down the garden path, through the wet grass, up the ridge. Her heart thudded in her ears as she reached the top, but the field was empty. No sign of him, no footprints, no movement, and still no wind. The dream came that night. She was standing on the cliffs, barefoot and trembling, the sky choked with clouds that wouldn't move. Somewhere below, the sea waited, but there was no sound of waves, no spray of salt on her skin, just silence. She turned, sensing something behind her. There he was. Daniel. Not the wide-grinned boy from her memory, not even the lanky teenager who slouched his way through breakfast, always late. This version of him stood just out of reach, older, different. His hoodie was too big, sleeves nearly hiding his hands, but his eyes, they hadn't changed. He opened his mouth to speak, but only wind came out, a long, low breath that stirred her hair but didn't touch her skin. Then she woke. Lena sat up in bed, breath caught somewhere between her lungs and her throat, one hand clutching the duvet like it might anchor her to something real. She could still feel it. That look in his eyes. Not frightened, not sad. Waiting. The next morning she walked into town, hoping the rhythm of her boots on the pavement might ground her. The village hadn't changed. Merrow's Point rarely did. The same handful of shops with their faded signs and crooked window panes, the butcher with his Monday deliveries, Mrs. Elkin and her miserable terrier doing their circuit of the square. Even the sea looked the same, a band of grey stitched along the horizon, still and unmoved. But something felt different. It was in the way people moved. Not hurried, not exactly, but distracted, like they were listening for something they couldn't name. At the cafe she paused, letting the warmth of the windows fog her vision for a moment before pushing the door open. Inside, Ruth was already seated, 2 coffees between them. "You're late," her sister said gently, but there was no real reproach in it. "I had a dream." Lena shrugged off her coat and sat down, folding her hands around the warm mug. Ruth raised an eyebrow. "You've had a lot of dreams. This one was different." There was a pause. "You've been seeing him again, haven't you?" Lena didn't answer straight away. Instead, she looked out the window where the cobblestones shimmered faintly with leftover rain, and then she nodded. "It wasn't just in the dream," she said, quieter now. "I saw a boy, in the field yesterday morning. Same build, same hoodie, no shoes. He didn't look at me, just stood there, then walked away." Ruth stirred her coffee too long. "It's someone passing through. Kids come through here sometimes. Hikers, teens looking to drink by the cliffs and write sad poems. It's not Daniel." "How can you be so sure?" "Because he's gone, Lena." Her voice cracked at the edges. "And I need you to start coming back too." Lena swallowed hard and looked away. She knew Ruth meant well. She always had. But the warmth of the cafe suddenly felt stifling, and the air seemed thick, like it was closing in around her. She murmured something about needing air, needing to check on something at home. Ruth didn't stop her. She didn't look back as she left. That afternoon the boy appeared again. Lena was in the conservatory, pruning a withered fern that had all but given up when the movement caught her eye. Quick and deliberate, a flicker of grey between the hedgerows. She didn't hesitate this time. She grabbed her coat, left the secateurs on the floor, and stepped out into the garden. The boy stood at the far edge of the field, the same hoodie, the same 2 long sleeves. This time he turned. Lena's breath hitched. It was like looking through water. The features weren't wrong, not exactly. They were soft, like something remembered too often, blurred by time and sorrow. His eyes met hers. And then, without a sound, he turned and began to walk. She followed. They moved through the field in silence, boots crushing frost-bitten grass, her heartbeat in her ears like a drum. The path he took skirted the cliff edge. Winding between low gorse bushes and clusters of rock, she remembered Daniel climbing as a boy. At the far end of the ridge, he stopped. A narrow trail, half overgrown and slick with moss, led down to the tide caves, places Daniel had explored for years. She hadn't been there since before the storm. The boy looked back once, then disappeared inside. Lena hesitated. The cave's mouth was no more than a shadow in the stone, but she could feel the cold breath of it, even without wind. She stepped forward. The cave swallowed sound. Even her footsteps seemed muted as she followed the narrow passage, one hand trailing the damp rock wall to keep her balance. And then she saw them. Drawings, hundreds of them, sheets of paper pinned to the walls with old nails, pebbles, bits of sea glass. Every one of them was of her face, her eyes, her hands, some smiling, some weeping, some asleep, one with her head turned away. The kind of drawings Daniel used to make, capturing tiny moments others missed. Her bent over tea, her brushing her hair, her staring out the window when she thought no one was watching. At the back, a single note. Not scrawled like the others, but written carefully, deliberately, in Daniel's hand. I didn't fall. I followed the wind. Her legs gave out. She sank to the cold stone floor, tears slipping silently down her cheeks, her breath coming in sharp, ragged pulls. She pressed the note to her chest like a talisman, and for just a moment she thought she heard it, a whisper. A low exhale, not from the sea or sky, but from the very walls around her. The sound of wind. The drawings stayed with her long after she left the cave. She could feel them pressing against her back like a weight, even though the only one she'd taken was the note. I didn't fall. I followed the wind. She kept it folded in her coat pocket like a heartbeat. It felt warm when she touched it, though she couldn't explain how. The next few days passed like fog. Lena stopped answering her sister's calls. She skipped the market, ignored the dentist appointment she'd booked weeks ago. She moved from room to room with no sense of purpose, drawn again and again back to the note. At night, she dreamed of wind, not the old, comforting kind that whispered through the trees or tugged at laundry on the line. No, this wind lived in her bones. It carried voices, laughter, piano keys. Sometimes she dreamed she was floating. Other times, she wasn't sure she was dreaming at all. On the fourth morning, just after dawn, she walked into town again, not for groceries or tea or another useless conversation with Ruth, but toward the library. Not the small, modern extension with its self-checkout machine and photocopier, but the old wing behind it, the one that smelled of dust and sea air and long-forgotten things. There she found the local history archives, buried behind a bookcase someone had clearly shoved back into place without much care. The room was lit only by one flickering bulb and a narrow window choked by ivy. She found what she was looking for faster than expected, the windless years. It was just a single mention in a cracked, cloth-bound volume titled The Chronicle of Merrow's Point, the kind of local curiosity you'd expect to find next to a binder of bridge club minutes. But there it was, a passage from 1873. Open quote. For 3 years the air held no breath, not a whisper. Crops failed, livestock grew nervous, children spoke of voices in the stillness. 9 were lost to the cliffs, though no waves were seen. The air returned only when her voice was no longer heard, close quote. There was no name, just her. No explanation of who she was or what she had done. Lena copied the passage into her notebook. She read it again. Then again. The wind left. Children were lost. The air returned when her voice vanished. She snapped the notebook shut and left. Ruth came by that evening, knocking just once before letting herself in. The door was never locked these days. Lena was sitting by the fireplace, hands around a cup of cold tea, eyes unfocused. Ruth didn't speak right away. She took in the dishes in the sink, the unopened post, the fact that Lena's slippers were on the wrong feet and her hair was still wet from the rain. Finally she said, "I'm worried about you. I know. Have you been outside? Seen anyone?" "I've seen him." That stopped Ruth in her tracks. "Lena? No." She looked up, sharp now. "Listen to me. He's there. I followed him. He led me to the tide caves. There are drawings, Ruth, of me, in Daniel's style, his handwriting, his note." Ruth's face crumpled with the weight of too much love and too little belief. "Lena, you've been... I'm not imagining this." Her voice rose, trembling. "Something is happening here. Something that doesn't fit inside your grief pamphlets and your casseroles and your sensible shoes. The wind left. The drawings are real. And the boy, he isn't just someone passing through." Ruth sat down slowly, as if the air itself had thickened. "There was a story," Lena said, quieter now, "from the archives, a long time ago. Same thing happened, no wind, missing children. And then one woman, her voice was no longer heard, and the wind returned." Ruth frowned. That could mean anything. Some tragedy that turned into myth, the kind of story people tell when they can't explain something. "Exactly," Lena whispered. "The kind of story people forget on purpose." A silence settled between them. "I want to help you," Ruth said at last, "but I don't know how." Lena gave a small, sad smile. "Then don't try to fix it. Just believe me." Her sister didn't answer. Later that night, Lena lit a fire and sat in the dark, the folded note pressed between her palms like a prayer. She didn't expect to hear the piano. At first, she thought it was in her head, a memory, one of the old recordings Daniel used to make on his phone, replaying in some forgotten folder. But it was coming from upstairs. The living room held its breath as Lena stood and crossed the hall. Every step up the staircase creaked under her weight, the sound too loud in the hush of the house. The door to Daniel's room was ajar. Light spilled from it, though she hadn't turned anything on. And inside, the music played. Not flawlessly, not with adult polish, but with the familiar hesitations of someone still learning. She knew every pause, every mistake. He'd practiced the same piece for weeks. She stepped into the room, empty, no one at the keyboard. But the final note still hung in the air, fading, until only silence remained. Her hand reached for the windowsill, needing the balance, and there, etched faintly into the glass, was a smudged fingerprint. Small, the size of a boy's. She let out a sound that wasn't quite a sob, wasn't quite a laugh, just something cracked and real. Then, so soft she nearly missed it, she heard it again. A whisper, not behind her, not from the house, from outside, from the cliffs, the wind, or something wearing its voice. The next morning, Lena packed a torch, a flask of tea, and an old wool scarf of Daniel's that still smelled faintly of peppermint and graphite. She didn't tell Ruth. There was no point. The tide was out by the time she reached the cliffs, and the grey expanse of stone beneath them glistened with sea water and weeds. The sky hung low, flat and empty, like someone had forgotten to paint it. The stillness hadn't broken. The wind remained absent, as though the air was waiting to inhale. She made her way carefully down the path she hadn't walked in over a year, the one Daniel used to take barefoot, daring the sea to catch him. Each step felt like a reckoning. She could almost hear him laughing, telling her to keep up. The tide caves waited, carved deep into the cliffside like mouths mid-breath. She slipped into the one she'd visited before, heart thudding, not with fear, not quite, more like recognition. The drawings were gone, all of them. The nails remained, and the bits of sea glass, the makeshift pins, everything that had once held them in place. But the paper? Gone, as if the tide had reached in and taken them back. Only the note remained. Still taped to the far wall. I didn't fall. I followed the wind. Lena touched it, fingers trembling. "Where?" she whispered aloud. "Where did you go?" The echo didn't answer, but her feet moved anyway, as though guided by something deep in her bones. She pressed her palm to the wall where the note had been, and for a moment she felt a warmth, not heat, but the memory of it, like sun through glass. Then she felt a draught. It didn't come from the entrance. It came from within the rock. She stepped back. There, a crack. A narrow slit between two slabs of stone, no wider than her shoulders, half covered by sea moss and darkness. She might have missed it completely had she not been standing so close. The air that drifted from it was strange. It didn't smell of salt or stone. It smelled like earth after rain, like burning leaves, like something she'd forgotten. Heart-pounding, Lena slipped sideways through the crack and stepped into a world that wasn't. It wasn't a place, not in the ordinary sense. The light had no source, yet she could see. The ground beneath her feet felt soft, but didn't sink. Shadows moved above her, slowly, gently, as if she were walking beneath water, though her skin remained dry. The air shimmered, full of dust motes or stars or memories. She couldn't tell which. She took a step, then another, and with each step something pulled at her, a sound or a scent or the ghost of a feeling. She passed a tree she remembered from childhood, its trunk bent just so, as if bowing in welcome. A bench appeared, the one her mother used to sit on, knitting and humming, and there a door, freestanding in the middle of the space, the same chipped blue paint as the back porch Daniel used to slam too hard. This wasn't imagination, it was memory. More than that, it was memory made solid. Lena stood still, letting it unfold. A piano note rang out ahead of her, and then a second. She turned and saw him. Daniel. He sat cross-legged in the middle of a clearing made of nothing, knees drawn up, sketchpad in hand. His hoodie was still too big. His hair was longer now, unkempt in the way she used to scold him for, and his cheeks had filled out just slightly, the roundness of childhood fading. He looked up, his eyes met hers, and for the first time in over half a year, Lena forgot how to breathe. "Mum," he said softly. She ran, fell to her knees before him, arms flung around his shoulders. He didn't vanish. He didn't turn to mist. He hugged her back with all the awkward, slightly too tight pressure of a teenage boy who didn't quite know how to let go. "You're here," she whispered. "You're really here." Daniel nodded, forehead pressed to her shoulder. "I wanted to come back. I tried, but once I followed the wind, I couldn't find the way." "What is this place?" she asked, drawing back to look at him. "Where are we?" His eyes flicked upward toward the moving sky. "I don't know. It's not a dream. It's not heaven. It's between, where the wind waits. I don't understand." "Neither do I." He gave a lopsided smile. "But I'm not scared here. It's not bad. It's quiet. But sometimes I feel you thinking of me. That's when the wind stirs." Lena stared at him. "Then come back with me." Daniel's expression faltered. "I can't. Not unless something breaks, or something is given up." The words chilled her. "Given up? I think someone has to stay behind." "No." Her voice cracked. "I didn't say it has to be you." They sat there, silence between them for a long moment. Then Daniel said, "You came a long way to find me." "I'd have gone further." He nodded, looking down at his sketchpad. "I drew you, every day. I didn't want to forget your face, the sound of your voice. I thought maybe, if I could make you real here, you'd find me." Lena placed a hand gently over his. "You never had to. I never stopped looking." The light above them shifted. The air began to move, not a gust, but a breeze. Soft, familiar, like a breath returning. And Daniel looked suddenly afraid. "They'll know you're here now," he whispered. "You're not supposed to find this place." "Who?" But he didn't answer. The wind picked up, and somewhere behind her, Lena heard a door creak open. The door stood alone in the air behind her. No frame, no hinges, just a tall rectangle of chipped blue paint, swaying gently in a wind that didn't seem to belong. It creaked open a little more. Lena turned to face it, her fingers still loosely entwined with Daniel's. "What happens if I go through?" she asked. Daniel didn't answer at first. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, if you could call it that, where the light bent like heat shimmer and fragments of memory flickered through the air. A carousel. His first bike. A dented cereal bowl. "I don't know," he said eventually. "Maybe you go back. Maybe you forget. Maybe you only remember what you need to." "And if I stay?" His jaw tensed. "Then someone else out there forgets you." Lena let out a breath. Her voice was quiet when she asked, "Is that what happened to you?" He nodded. She looked back at the door. It wasn't inviting. It wasn't threatening. It simply was. Still moving in that windless wind. "I don't want to lose you again," she whispered. Daniel smiled, but there was sadness tucked at the corners. "You didn't lose me. You remembered me. That's why you found this place." She studied him. The way his hoodie hung on him, just like before. The way he squinted when he smiled. He looked so alive, and yet not quite of the world she had left. "You're not the only one who needs me," she said. "I know. I have a sister. I know. I have a life." Daniel's voice broke slightly. "I know." Lena reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind his ear, the same way she used to do when he was little. He didn't flinch or pull away. Then he looked down. "I can walk with you," he said, "to the edge, but no further." She nodded. They moved through the not world together, side by side, past memories that shimmered and faded, snapshots of life, of love, of the thousand quiet moments that had once seemed so forgettable. A school bag dumped on the floor, wet footprints in the hallway, a broken egg on a tiled kitchen floor, laughter and shouting in equal measure. The wind was louder now, not violent but insistent, as if something had finally stirred after a long, long sleep. When they reached the door, it had stopped moving. It stood still, waiting. Lena turned to Daniel. "You don't belong here," she said gently. He blinked. "Neither do you." "No, but maybe you're not meant to stay either. Maybe the way out isn't a door. Maybe it's a memory." He looked confused. So she did what mothers do. She knelt and held his face in both hands, thumbs brushing his cheeks. "I remember the day you were born," she whispered. "I remember how you screamed until they put you on my chest. I remember the way your fist curled around my finger and didn't let go." Daniel's eyes shimmered. "I remember your voice cracking when you read aloud. I remember the first time you sketched me while I wasn't looking, and then pretended you hadn't. I remember the smell of your jumper, the way you used to hum when you were nervous. I remember you, Daniel. I remember you. The wind surged around them, swirling leaves that hadn't existed a moment ago. Her scarf lifted, his hoodie flared. Then he took a breath. His chest rose and fell like he hadn't breathed in months, and he exhaled. "Mum," he said, "I'm here. I think I can find the way." She smiled, tears running freely now. "Then go." Daniel hesitated only for a moment, and then turned, walking away from the door, away from her, back into the shifting light, not vanishing, just moving forward, one step at a time. Lena turned to the door. The knob was cold beneath her fingers. As she stepped through, she felt a weight lift, not from her shoulders, but from the space behind her ribs. And when her foot touched earth again, real earth, damp and cold and filled with salt and sea, she was back in the tide cave. Alone, but not. Something had shifted. The silence that had gripped Merrow's Point for half a year cracked like thin ice. Above her outside the cave, the wind had returned. She stepped into it and let it wrap around her. Her hair lifted, her scarf danced, her coat flapped like wings. The sea rolled in the distance. She climbed the path up the ridge, the wind urging her forward. The sky was brighter than it had been in months, still grey but alive. At the top of the hill, a boy 10, maybe 11, stood staring out at the horizon. He turned as she passed, wide-eyed. Are you the lady from the stories?" he asked. "The one who vanished?" She blinked. "What story?" He shrugged. "My gran says a woman disappeared after the storm, looking for her boy. And what happened to her?" The boy tilted his head. "They say she walked into the wind." Lena smiled. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the last thing she had, a charcoal drawing. A woman, a boy, walking together across a field of wind. "Would you like this?" she asked. The boy nodded. She handed it over and walked on, the wind now singing through the hedges, up the chimneys, over the rooftops. Later that day they would say the stillness had broken, that it felt like waking from a long dream, that something had returned. But Lena knew. The wind hadn't left, it had waited, and now it carried the sound of laughter, faint and far away, but real.
This was Where the Wind Waits, written by Beryl Coops. I hope you enjoyed my short story. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. I have written over 500 short stories over the years under many pen names. I will be updating these and recording them under the Beryl Coops name. I will be listing them on YouTube as fast as we can get them recorded. They will include historical drama, humor, adventure, romance, period drama, mystery, thriller, war stories, spy stories, revenge, horror, psychological horror, dystopian, disaster, children's stories, love stories, and more. Too many to name. Something for everyone. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a thumbs up. It helps others find my channel. Until next time, thank you for listening to the end.